Okay.
Excuses.
We ready? Okay, why don't we go ahead and stand for the pledge and invocation, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Lord, we thank you for today. We thank you for another opportunity to come in here, Lord, and to conduct the business of Walton County. Pray that you'll be with us, give us patience and discernment, Lord, that you help us to make decisions in the best interest of the county and the citizens who live here. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, just real quick before we get started, if you haven't already done so, please either turn your cell phones off or put them on silent where we can minimize interruptions. And so the first item on the agenda is approving the minutes.
Motion to approve. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the minutes? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Mr. Dias?
Mr. Chairman, we have 3 requests for continuances. You want me to go through those individually?
Please.
Okay. The first one is number 2 on your agenda under quasi-judicial. It is the Lambert Smith small-scale amendment. We have a request to continue until the February 9th, 2017 Planning Commission meeting at this location at this time.
We have a motion?
Motion to continue. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Third item is the Ocean Estates small-scale amendment. This is also a request to continue to the February 9th, 2017 meeting at 5 o'clock at this location.
Need a motion?
Motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries.
And then the last request for continuance from the applicant is the number 4, Foy abandonment. Request to continue to February 9th, 2017 at this time and location.
We have a motion?
I'll make the motion. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, that brings us down to the first item, which is a legislative item. It is the Rural Village Land Development Code Amendment. I'll ask Mr. Carpenter to come up and brief the commission on this application.
Thank you, Commissioners. Matt Carpenter for the record for the Planning Department. This is an application to amend the Land Development Code to make the rural village future land use category consistent, or excuse me, to make the Land Development Code rural village land use category consistent with the future land use policy L-1.2.4. And essentially what we're adding, if you'll can turn to page 3 of your staff report. We're adding neighborhood commercial to the primary uses, and we're adding some conditions that are at the bottom of the page there that are the exact word-for-word conditions in the comprehensive plan. So all of the language that we're proposing to add to the Land Development Code comes directly from the comprehensive plan rural village policy,
Just to get them together.
just to make them look the same.
Very good. Anybody have any questions, staff? Thank you, Mr. Carpenter.
Yes, sir.
We don't have anybody who signed up to speak. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comments. Commissioners?
Motion to approve.
Second. You got your pick. Mr. Gladwell. No further discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, the next items are all quasi-judicial, need to be sworn in.
Sure. Anyone who anticipates testifying before the board on any item on the quasi-judicial docket, would you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before this board will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you. If you would, say your name when you come to the podium and spell your last name for Karen and tell us that you have been sworn. That would be helpful. Commissioners, anyone had any ex parte contacts on any item on the quasi judicial we need to disclose?
No, sir.
I hear none from everyone. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Chairman, the first item is the Thomas Lavin small-scale amendment. I'll ask Matt to come up and brief the board on this application. The request is to change the land use on 0.95 acres from residential preservation to low-density residential. I'll ask Matt to give the details.
Thank you, Commissioners. Matt Carpenter for the record. As Mr. Dice stated, this is a request to change 0.95 acres from residential preservation, which has been that designation since November 7, 1996, when we adopted the comprehensive plan. They're proposing to change that to low-density residential. The application states the purpose is to create 2 approximately half-acre lots. Some of you that may have been on the commission in years past, this was the subject of a previous small-scale amendment request several years ago, and they were proposing to do many more units than the 2 that the applicant states in their application they're proposing to do now. We've looked at this particular development, and this lot is approximately twice the size as the lots immediately to the west. When this came through a few years ago, they were proposing to significantly increase the density here, and the surrounding neighborhood did participate in that process and objected to that level of density. This level of density appears to match what's immediately to the west. It's much less than what's immediately to the east, but these lots appear to have originally been created along with these other lots, and we believe it would be compatible to allow this particular land use change to create 2 lots. The applicant's representative is here, and they can answer any further questions.
Anybody have any questions of staff before he sits down? Okay.
Good evening. My name is John Nash, NASH. I'm with O'Connell and Associates Consulting Engineers. We are the applicant's agent for this particular request. The applicant, or we are requesting, as Mr. Dice said, or Mr. Carpenter said, to split this lot into 2 equal lots, about half acre lengthwise, to have 2 Gulfront lots. As he pointed out, this will be consistent with the neighbors to the west. To the east are condominiums, and there are other parcels along that area that are condominiums, but this will be 2 single-family homes is what we're requesting, and the small-scale amendment's required in order to make that request for a future lot split, to split it into 2 lots. I've got representatives of Saxon and LeSueur who did the consistency analysis for this small-scale amendment request, and the homeowners or property owners are here as well if you have any questions for us.
Commissioners? You can't let him off that.
In the documents, there was a question about an easement. Could you explain that?
Sure. I'm not sure exactly when, but at some point in the past there was a ingress-egress easement placed on this property on the east property line that's 6 feet wide. That easement will not be affected by this request. It's inside any building setback line that'll be on this property. If they don't split the lot in 2 and they build a house, that easement will still remain there. So from our understanding, this won't affect that one bit. The easement's there, it will remain.
It goes from 38 to the Gulf,
That's correct.
so it's essentially a beach access,
It is.
and that's not affected by this?
No, sir.
Okay.
Because the building setback is 7.5 feet, that access is 6 feet wide, and they can't build inside that 7.5 foot setback.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much. We have nobody who signed up to speak. Is there anybody, would you like to? Up to you.
I'm sorry, the commissioner continues to look at me. I'm good, I'll sit down. I can address the issue of the easement if there's any more
That'd be good.
questions
Go
on
ahead.
it. Okay. And for the record, my name is Melissa Ward, W-A-R-D, for Sachs and LeSueur. We did the compatibility or the analysis of the small-scale amendment. Before I move on, I would like to go ahead and state that in the staff report, there is a notation that we needed to provide an updated title opinion. We have that. I'm going to submit it into the record. The applicant purchased the property a little over a year and a half ago, and because the application is a little over a year old, the survey was within the 12-month period, but the title policy on the property was not. So we were required to give an updated title opinion to make sure that there's nothing on the property that is questionable. The easement was actually recorded in 1994, October of 1994, and it is from Johnny Hawkins to James Pitts and his wife Mary Pitts, who at that time lived in Alabama. The easement is for the east 6 feet of the following described property, which is our subject property, Lot 1, Block C, Seacrest subdivision, and that is for the free right of ingress and egress over and across said property. And there's an interesting note in it that in the event that they needed to put some form of utilities, power lines or anything in that 6-foot easement, that they would have the right to then be on the other part of the property temporarily in order to install said utilities, and then they would have to leave. So the 6-foot easement is there. It's in the 7.5-foot setback, and it is an easement to Mr. and Mrs. Pitts. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Pitts may have sold said property wherever they had it or whatever. We don't have yet whether or not this particular Mr. and Mrs. Pitts have transversed that to anyone else.
Does this go with them personally or with property they own?
It doesn't address it as in other words, most easements that Hartford Beach access like that, it'll say this property you have access for the use of lot number so-and-so at such and such across the street or whatever. This is directly to Mr. and Mrs. Pitts.
Yeah, that's what's confusing.
It's a little confusing. It is, but it's there and it exists and it hasn't, as far as we can tell, been removed.
No, would that only exist as long as they own a parcel nearby, or is it forever?
I think that the question that you're trying to ask me is whether or not they can transfer that easement to somebody else. And I believe the answer to that is yes. After talking with the title agent in our office, Colleen Sachs, I'm sorry she's not here tonight. She's not able to come. But Mr. Davis could probably address how the easement works. I believe because specifically in the easement it says sold to grantee, its successors and assigns an easement for ingress, egress, and utilities purposes over, across, and under the following described property. So because it's assigns, and Mr. Davis can correct me, they could assign it to someone else.
That's true. That is absolutely true.
Woohoo!
I would think it'd be very valuable.
Okay.
Did you have any questions of me? Thank you.
All right. Nobody has signed up. Is there anybody who would like to speak on this item? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Clay Atkinson, attorney for Buster Bickerstaff, for the record. We are an adjoining property owner. As Mr. Carpenter noted, this property has previously come before the board seeking, in that instance, a more intense use than even what's proposed now. We oppose the requested change, and the reason we oppose the requested change is this. This is lot 1 of this subdivision. This is the original Seacrest subdivision. I formerly represented Ms. Dawkins, not Ms. Hawkins. And this property and its development rights were subject to a piece of litigation that actually involved every homeowner in that subdivision. There are a number of issues about what could and could not be done. The ultimate outcome of this is it is, of course, to the county's discretion how you zone it, how you handle a small-scale amendment. We opposed it once before, and we opposed it again today for this reason. This is part of a subdivision. And that subdivision, regardless of lot size, had every lot to have a single-family dwelling and an accessory unit, the proverbial mother-in-law cottage. The persons who bought this bought a lot in a known subdivision. And yes, I'm well aware the compatibility analysis offered to you by Ms. LeSueur indicates, look right next to them, there's a huge condominium complex. And if you look a little further down the beach past those single-family lots and ignore all of the Seacrest subdivision to the north of Highway 30A or County Road 38, you have more multifamily development. I don't think I need to tell the planning board that 30A is littered at this point with multifamily development south of County Highway 30A on the Gulf. Our position, however, is this. When you buy a lot in a subdivision, you've bought a lot in that subdivision. This would not be consistent nor compatible with that subdivision. The argument, well, look what's been developed around it. In our ears rings hollow, and we would hope it would ring hollow in your ears as well for this reason. If we accept the position that look how much multifamily development exists on 30A, then every single family lot on 30A that's a single family dwelling is going to come to you and say, let me get more density. Let me build more, because everybody around me got to. And at some point, we're going to completely change the character of that. I know Walton County, among all of its concerns, has also always taken into consideration the need to maintain consistency within platted subdivisions. And that's what this is. Yes, this is a 1 acre lot as opposed to a ½ acre lot. There's no doubt about that. It was specifically carved out as the largest front lot in the subdivision, but it was left with the same conditions. Single family unit with a mother-in-law cottage. Respectfully, as Mr. Davis, I'm sure, has advised this board many a time, and I've advised many boards I've represented, what you're basing a decision on today is the small-scale amendment and what they can get by changing this to low-density residential. They're saying all they want to do is change it so they can get a lot split, and then they're going to throw 2 houses on it. This can be like everything else. That's not what's before you today. And I would assert it would be inappropriate for this planning commission to make a decision based on representation that is not binding. They are not bound to merely split that and put 1 house in 1 house. They are allowed, once you give them this change, to maximize the density of that. And when you look at what they can put there under the maximized density, it is not that far away from what the BCC has previously denied on this same parcel under a prior owner. So our respectful request on behalf of Mr. Bicker's staff, as well as other owners in Seacrest who have opposed this consistently for the better part of a decade, is to deny this request. It is unfortunate that they are unable to split this lot under the county development standards. We recognize that. Their redress should be to seek amendment of land development code. Perhaps this is a circumstance where the land development code should be amended to allow lot splits in more categories. But what they're asking is to increase their density. And they can do more than what they're saying they will do. At the point you approve this, we're not going to be back here able to say, guys, look, they're now putting 4 units up. They're now stacking this into the middle of the neighborhood. And I can assure you the argument, even if we do that, it's going to be what it was previously. Look right next to us. It's not that different. It's different than the subdivision they bought a lot in. And at some point, the onus has to be on the buyer of these properties to look at what they're buying and to actually understand they're buying as part of a subdivision. This is not carved out of the subdivision. It is part of all the other subdivision requirements. It should not be more than everything else in that subdivision. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir.
Can I respond?
Yes.
We might want to
Was there others?
take all the public comments
Okay,
before you
okay.
take rebuttal. I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am?
I was wondering if I might speak. I'm
Yes,
not-
you sure can.
Thank you.
Ma'am, were you sworn earlier?
Yes, I was. I stood up. My name is Shirley Wolfram, and I am a property owner on Seacrest Drive,
Can you spell your last name for,
WOLFRAM.
okay.
And first, I would like to thank you for not approving 10 years ago to change our residential area into a multiplex area. And I really would like to thank you for that. I've never spoken before a group before, so I'm a little nervous, but I would like to say that I'm opposed to this building project by Thomas Lavin also. Right now, on Seacrest Drive, I know you understand that 30A is becoming very, very crowded with residences and traffic. We have difficulty during spring break, during major holidays, as well as during the summer, even getting out of Seacrest Drive onto 30A. And I think that the more and more buildings that are being proposed and allowed to be built there, it's becoming impossible. So I would really appreciate it if you would oppose this change from a single unit to a double unit. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm the property owner. I would like to speak.
Hang on a second, let's make sure there's no other comments from the public.
Okay. Any other public comments that are not the applicant? Okay, we'll go ahead and close the public portion of the hearing.
And we'll have a vote. Yeah.
Now, if you're the property owner,
Yes, sir.
okay, would y'all, I mean,
I was going to respond on legalities. I assume he just wants to explain his intentions.
okay. You can speak, sir.
Thank you. I have not been sworn in.
Okay, sure, come on. I'll swear you. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give before this board will be the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Just say your name and spell the last name.
My name is Thomas Lavin, Lavin. And I just wanted to make it clear, I've never been in front of the board, and I thank you for, allowing me to speak. We've been coming to 38 for years, and we have a home in, oh my God, I'm kind of nervous. I've never spoken in front of the board before, but we have a home down here in Seagrove, and I just want to say clearly, I don't plan on doing anything. We initially were going to do one house, and it became so big it wouldn't be in any way consistent with the neighborhood, and so my wife and I brought up the idea of just making a house that's consistent. So I respect the attorney's comments, but I have absolutely no intention of doing a condo or anything more than two houses that will flow with everything west. And you can make an amendment. I mean, that's absolutely, I'm not a developer. I'm just a guy that has a house down here, and we want to, have a house right on the water, so.
Let me ask you, do you understand the position of the other homeowner who spoke and what the attorney said as far as what could happen? Do you understand what their fear is?
Oh, absolutely, and that would be my fear also. I mean, we love it down here. I think his argument spun out into condos and these kind of things. That is clearly absolutely not my intention.
Understood. But if we approve this, and you walk out the door after the BCC approves it, if they do, and the next day you put a for sale sign out front and sold it, because now you have two lots, what's the next buyer going to be able to do? And I'm not saying you would do that.
Right.
But that's the can of worms that gets opened. And I think that's the fear that people have.
Right. I hadn't, from the standpoint, my intentions, as I said, are very clear.
I understand that completely.
Right.
I don't know you and they don't know you.
Right, of course. And I understand that.
I'm not going to say you're going to do anything, but
right.
That's a legitimate fear that people have, especially down on 38 in that area.
If you approve a small-scale amendment, are you saying that I could put a condominium there?
You could do the maximum number of units.
Yeah. You could do more than one house.
Well, I believe that's two homes, though, the maximum units.
Each lot.
Oh, two, okay. Well, yeah, it's certainly not my intention. We already have Boheme working on two separate
I'm just saying that's the fear that these people are expressing.
Right. I understand that's the case, but yeah.
Okay.
So, all right, thank you.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You made a statement that the house became too big. Why couldn't you just put the house you want to build on the acre lot and be done with it? I mean, you see what I'm saying? Why does it have to be a humongous house?
Well,
could you explain what you meant by that?
we end up designing a home that would maximize the Gulf front on the property with a local architect, and it ended up being 10,000 square feet, which, I really didn't want anything near that. We want a 5,000 square foot, and we want to sell the other one. So the money person I would have in it would be crazy. It just didn't work. So that's where my wife and I came to. So we don't want that big of a home, and we want to split it into two 5,000 square foot homes.
But the reality is you could build that smaller home on that single lot.
I could. That's true.
Yeah.
Have a nice lawn.
Yeah, too much lawn.
You're our boy.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
My name's Lois Laseur. I'm with Saxon Laseur. That's Laseur. I have been sworn. I apologize that I'm losing my voice. I'll do my best to not croak at you too much. At the time that the property was designated residential preservation, you could still get a lot split in residential preservation. So this lot was capable of being split into two separate lots. The county removed that permission because of all of the many inappropriate lot splits that were entered into during the height of the whole boom and the flipping that was going on, and it was just decided that at that time that residential preservation should not allow lot splits. The code allows for a person who is proposing an amendment to enter into a development agreement with the county that limits the amount that they can put on a particular piece of property. And that's what we would propose to do, is enter into a development agreement with the county that specifies this would only be subdivided into two lots.
I'm sorry, two lots with a certain density or just two lots?
Well, 2 units, however you feel like it should be crafted, but essentially two semi-equal lots that would be compatible with the rest of the subdivision, roughly half-acre lots with one home and one mother-in-law cottage, just like everyone else in the subdivision has.
That was the answer I was looking for.
Absolutely. And we anticipated that request, and we're perfectly fine with it. And that would keep him from selling it to someone who would then decide that a 4-unit condo would be wonderful.
Hey, Lois, I have another question, and I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. To the east, those individual lots there, were they ever part of Seacrest subdivision?
I believe they were.
Were they all that size in the original plat?
They were, and I don't know why this particular lot was twice the size of the others. I don't know.
East or to the west?
I'm sorry, to the west. You're right.
Now, to the ones that are now condominiums?
No, I'm sorry, the other direction, to the west.
To the west.
They're all single
Single
family.
family lot.
Were they all part of Seacrest at one time?
I believe so.
Or still are? Were they all that size in the original plat?
I believe so.
And this one was just larger? Okay.
This one was just twice as big as everybody else's, and I have no idea why that was.
Does anybody know?
Yeah.
I have a question. You're talking about splitting the lots. How do you intend on splitting? Are you going to split it to be the same lot to the west size, or are you going to split it in the north and south?
No, they're going to split it so they have two Gulfront lots, just like the ones to the west.
To the west.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chairman, I think somebody back there had an answer to the question.
Yeah, he can't.
He can't.
No, that'd be out of order, yeah.
Then they split the lots. That still won't interfere with the easement coming to there for people to have access
No,
to the beach?
it's only a 6-foot wide easement. The setback from the side is 7.5 feet, so there will be no conflict with that easement.
Basically, the only question for splitting the lot, will they be the same as the ones to the west?
Yes,
And have a 6-foot easement go through it?
exactly. And it's an easement for that one particular family, so it's not like it's an easement that handles hundreds and hundreds
It's not
of
a
people on a
neighborhood
day.
easement, it's just a single family easement.
It's continued.
Yeah,
Single family.
right. Right. Mark, how would that work as far as entering into a development agreement on that?
What you can do under the statute is you can grant the small-scale amendment but condition it upon the entry of a developer's agreement limiting the density and intensity of the use of the two lots. There's nothing in the statute that prevents you from doing that.
And your own code
And that
references
effectively
that statute.
guarantees they can only build one
If
single-family
they
residence.
violate the developer's agreement, we have lots of rights to set aside the lot split.
Okay,
I wish we had more of them, frankly.
yeah, that would sound reasonable.
You said no problem with that?
No, we have no problem with that whatsoever. In fact, we anticipated that that would be the case.
You want a motion to that effect?
It's up to you.
I make a motion, we grant with the stipulation of a development order.
It would be a developer's agreement that limits the density and intensity as stated to a single-family home in a mother-in-law condo.
What he said.
On each lot.
On each lot.
On each lot.
I second that.
We have a motion, and we have a second. Karen, did you get that motion? Mark, you want to state it
It would
for us?
be a motion to recommend approval of the small-scale amendment with the condition that the developer enter a development agreement with Walton County, that they only be allowed to put a single-family home and mother-in-law cottage, whatever we call it in the code these days, on each lot, one on each lot. And there'll be other terms and conditions of the developer's agreement which will add lots of other terms.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Karen, you got it now? Are there any other questions or discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, the last item on the agenda is the Seclusion Cove Small Scale Amendment. It's a request to change 6.36 acres from small neighborhood to low density residential. Again, I'll ask Mr. Carpenter to come up and brief the board.
Thank you, Commissioners. Matt Carpenter for the record. As Mr. Dice says, this is a request to change 6.36 plus or minus acres from the present small neighborhood to low-density residential. And this particular parcel has a unique circumstance in that due to its location at the end of a gated subdivision driveway, it cannot meet the public and neighborhood commercial that's required in small neighborhood, because you got to go through a gate to even get to this parcel. We met with the applicant, and this was the best solution we could come up with because we could not figure out how to meet the small neighborhood non-residential requirement due to those physical limitations of the lot itself. It's my understanding that they're proposing to do something similar to the subdivision that you would travel through to get to this one, if the land use change would be approved. The density, we would support that. We feel it's compatible with the existing subdivision that provides access to this parcel. There is a large wetland on the southern portion of the site. There is plenty of room to cluster the density to the uplands, just to the west of the cul-de-sac. The applicant is here and can provide more detail unless you have further questions of staff.
Anybody have any questions of staff? Thank you, sir.
John Nash again. Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. You did a good job of explaining this one. I believe you should have in your packet a preliminary site plan for what we are proposing. It's a 4-lot, single-family residential subdivision. It's at the end of a private street that's gated. Only access is through that street. As Mr. Carpenter stated, one of the requirements of small neighborhood is that you have a mix of use. You have either civic use, public use, commercial use. Since it's at the end of that street, that's not practical. I don't think it's in anyone's best interest to try and put a mix of use in that particular situation. So this is what we've come up with to try and to resolve the issue. We have, because of the access to the site being through the existing neighborhood, we've reached out to the homeowners association of the neighborhood. We started a dialogue with them. As part of that, there will be some issues that will need to be ironed out in terms of access. There's an existing easement that that provides access to this parcel. It's unrestricted. So there is access to the parcel, but it's via a private road. And there will be some issues I'm sure the homeowners association would like to discuss. They have made some comments regarding this, and they've stated they'd like to discuss their concerns, and we're open to that. However, we'd like to, with the small scale amendment, it does not have any, we have a preliminary site plan, but we still have a development process to go through, and we intend to work through this process and that process with the homeowner association in order to get those issues ironed out. Again, I've got representatives of Saxon and LeSueur here. If you have any questions for us, we're available.
Commissioners? So this is essentially a down zoning. Am I reading this right?
Yes.
Okay.
Essentially, yes. It's an interesting situation. There's a requirement in the code that if it was a smaller lot, it was less than 5 acres, you could be relieved of having to do a mixed use. But since this is technically over 5 acres, even though only 2+ acres is developable, that was not an option in this case.
Okay.
So the only option was to seek a small scale amendment.
Okay. No questions? Thank you. We'll open the public portion of the hearing. Jason Walker? Yes, sir.
Jason Walker, W-A-L-K-E-R.
Jason, were you sworn in?
No, sir, I wasn't.
Mr. Walker, just raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give before this board will be the truth?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Back in March, I believe it was, I bought a lot in a subdivision. I was aware of how the subdivision was, and I purposely, decided to buy and build a home in the subdivision because of how the subdivision was laid out. I liked the way it was. I own the lot turning on the Jan's Way, going back into where he's proposing to build all of these houses. My only problem is I've talked with HOA. They're saying that if this is done this way, that they're not going to be in the HOA. They're not going to pay dues. They're still going to have use of the roads, the gate, the community dock. That's really my only concern is, I'm living in a subdivision paying dues to upkeep the private roads, the gate, all the landscaping, and, they're not paying any dues.
Do you feel like they should share in those expenses?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Shouldn't your association have settled that with them then?
I spoke with them today, and they said that they hadn't heard anything about this until a week ago. Is what she told me.
Okay.
So they haven't. I guess they haven't had enough time to prepare.
Well, they can set up an agreement with them so that they share in the maintenance of the road and everything, and
Right.
still don't have access to your common areas if you need to. So.
Right. Well, what I was told was they could still get in the subdivision. All this could go through, and then if they decided they did not want to join the HOA, then they didn't have to, and it had to be approved by everybody who owned a lot in a subdivision. So if one person decided that, they didn't want to approve this, and they wouldn't be in the homeowner association and not paying dues. Sir?
I think those things can be addressed.
Okay. That was really my only concerns.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Wedger?
I'm sorry I wasn't sworn in, Joe.
Mr. Wade, just raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
Okay.
Hey, board members, I'm Mike Wigger. I'm actually on the board of directors for Seclusion Bay for this subdivision that we're talking about. I talked to the president and vice president. We only recently found out this week about this meeting. So they're all out of town or in the hospital. So the purpose that I'm here is just to ask for a postponement so that our board can get together and do a development order or a development agreement with the developer and iron this stuff out before the zoning is changed, so that we don't run into the same problem of once it's changed, then it's going to be hard to change it back if there's something we can agree to. So what we'd like to do as board members is be able to have enough time to put together a plan to present to your board on this along with the developer, and hopefully we can work everything out and come back with a recommendation that we both agree to. we've got 53 members
Right.
that we got a fiduciary responsibility to. And we on the short notice, we hadn't had time to even get the board together or to contact legal or.
I'll say it'll be up to the commissioners. You also have the time between this meeting and the county commissioners meeting to get those agreements taken care of. And I would strongly suggest, and I think the developer understands, they have to work with you to make this work. Even if it goes, if we recommend approval, it would be with the condition that they sit down with you and work these things out prior to the BCC approving it.
And then if it wasn't worked out, where would we stand?
Well, the BCC probably would not approve it. We don't approve anything.
Okay.
We're just we make a recommendation is all we do. And the BCC looks at our recommendation, and they take it seriously. But I think if you showed up with 53 people or 25 people at a BCC meeting and opposed this, I think your odds are pretty doggone good.
Well, the problem with showing up to people is a lot of them are out of state.
I understand.
And
you understand what I'm saying.
I do, yes, sir. Yes, and all we would like to do is if we could.
We don't have to stop the process for you to be able to work with
Right, and we don't want to stop it. We'd just like to postpone it until the next meeting. That'd give us time to get everything in order. And for our board to get together, to contact legal if we need to get with the developer, and just do these things that we would have done if we'd have been notified, if we'd have known about it.
Okay.
So we're just asking for till the next meeting to give us time to get it together.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to speak on this item? Seeing none, we will close the public portion of the hearing, and I'm sure you have a response.
Yes, thank you. Melissa Ward for Saxon LeSueur, representing the owner of the property, and that's WARD, and I have been sworn in. I would like to say that as recently as actually closer to 7 o'clock this morning, our time, I had a conversation with the president or the vice president of the association, Mr. Skiff, and yesterday I spoke with Mr. Swift. And let's be clear that where we stand on this and where the position is, our client has an easement across that property. Our client owns the property, and to develop it without this amendment, he would be forced to put in more on that property than should fit on it. So he has the legal right to do what he's doing, and I'll let Lois LeSueur speak on that as the attorney. But I want to address the fact that the initial Mr. Walker stated on the record that nobody has talked to the association. That is untrue. I have documents and emails where we've communicated. And the communication from our office to their president, vice president, treasurer, and I believe another gentleman on the board, we prepared association documents to mirror those exactly because Mr. Michalowski wanted to be exactly, that he likes the subdivision and he wants it to meet the same design standards and to look like that because it's a nice subdivision. But the subdivision is hardly built out in any way, and he is wanting to improve it and probably bring some more attention to this subdivision to help it. And everyone so far that's called me from the association is in favor of it. They're in favor of 4 lots, and they're in favor of it being similar. And they did mention that they wanted them to pay association dues and that they wanted them to be involved in maintenance of the streets, and that's only fair, and Mr. Michalowski is prepared to do that. One of the other issues that they brought up is they wanted him to pay past dues, and that's something that we're having to negotiate with them. And so we've sent them an email and asked them to please spell out your plan, what you think you want. Well, they haven't done that because they haven't had a board meeting. And that's okay because it has been a short period of time. The small scale amendment gets submitted, gets turned into the Planning Commission, and goes on to the BCC. It's almost less than any time we've ever seen anything go through the process. So it's not really that anybody is trying to hide anything, it's that the process moves quickly. And we like to add to the fact that Mr. Michalowski has a contract on this property. So he is making arrangements to go through this process, but he has a deadline to meet as well. So a continuance is not something that he agrees to. It's your choice, obviously, but it's not something that he agrees to. His intentions, as he's told me yesterday afternoon, as I was on my way after I had spoke with Mr. Swift, was to go ahead and negotiate with them and to work with them to incorporate or adapt or move this subdivision as a phase 2 of Seclusion Bay. The only concern that he has is that they're going to want him to do more than what's reasonable, and they haven't yet told us exactly what they want. He feels confident that we can move through that before the Board of County Commissioners meeting, and we just need to set a meeting. Mr. Skiff, as of this morning, is getting with me in the next day or so to set up a time after he talks to his board members to meet or have a phone conference for all of those board members to determine what they want to have done. One of their requests was the proposal. Then this is not even submitted to the county yet, except for this is what we think we want to do, was that it was going to be a gravel road. They've asked about putting asphalt in instead to make it similar to that road, to the one that goes in. So and he's not objecting to it. He just wants to make sure that what they're asking for is not above and beyond what they would ask for anybody else. The original piece of property was the developer's property. It was the leftover piece after Seclusion Bay was platted. And he maintained an easement to himself to cross over that property across Lot 19. The owner of Lot 19 is Mr. Swift. He is well aware of it. He has no objections to it. And he told me so, and he's emailed and he copied, I believe, Karen on it. Mr. Swift has asked us whether or not we want to buy Lot 19. So there's a lot of conversation that has happened that apparently Mr. Walker's not aware of, and that's okay. So we just ask you to move on with the decision as you are. We ask you to recommend approval. We ask you to move on to the board, move it on to the Board of County Commissioners, and we have put it on record that we're trying to communicate with them and have a meeting with them about these association issues before the Board of County Commission meeting, and have that in place. And now Ms. LeSueur can address any legal issues that arise from the conversation, unless you have any questions.
Oh, Mr. Sewer? We're going to wear that voice out tonight, aren't we?
Yeah, you probably are, but that's okay. Then nobody can ask me to talk for, at least a month.
I bet somebody at home will be appreciative of that.
Oh, he's out of town right now. He doesn't get the benefit. But anyway, he's the one who gave it to me, so,
I don't doubt that at all.
I think perhaps some of the folks in the neighborhood have misunderstood exactly what this process is about. We're not asking for a development approval tonight. We are asking to take the gentleman said, once this is done, it would be very difficult to undo. I cannot imagine why anybody in that neighborhood would ever want to undo the significant reduction in the amount of development that would be approved on this property. Whether or not we ever enter into an agreement with them, whether or not our client ever develops this property, reducing the amount of development that's allowed on this property is to everyone's benefit. It's impacted with wetlands, it's impacted with flood zones, and again, we are more than willing to enter into a development agreement that says we are limited to 4 lots, and only 4 lots. What our client would like to do and what we're attempting to negotiate is to become phase 2 and be a member of the same homeowners association. If we can't negotiate that, then we'll have a separate 4-lot homeowners association that is very similar to what already exists.
Anybody have any questions for Mrs. Stewart? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
The God said video on that.
Commissioners?
Okay.
Discussion, comments, questions, motions?
Do we need to put a developer's agreement on there to limit it to a 4-lot subdivision?
I think that this is...
Under the small scale amendment statute and ordinance, you can if you choose to. You don't have to.
I mean, I know it's a reduction anyway, so.
Yeah. It's a huge benefit to the neighborhood to reduce the number.
Yeah.
Just what can be done in there.
Yeah, and then the neighborhood will get their chance when it comes back.
Well, I think you can condition it upon, if it's approved, condition it upon working with the HOA to resolve all those issues before it goes to BCC.
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Is there any conditions on that motion?
With the condition that they work it out with the homeowner association, which I know they're already working on, but we'll make it part of it as a condition. 4 lots. Y'all want a developer's agreement on there with 4 lots?
I think they said they would.
He's only doing 4.
Yeah.
Okay, then we'll add the developer's agreement with 4 lots on there too.
Ms. Owens, you got that?
Still second for me?
Frank, you seconded. Mr. Anderson, second. Okay, any more questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That's the last item on the agenda. Mr. Dias, I have a question. Is this your last meeting with us?
Yes, sir, it probably will be.
I want to publicly thank you and tell you how much I've appreciated working with you and your assistance in educating me as much as you have.
Well, I appreciate it. You know, it's been a pleasure to work. I've been here almost 6 years now, and I've enjoyed it. It's been a blast. Got a great group, great staff. Worked with many commissioners over my 6 years here, and I enjoyed each one of them and respected each one of them. And so my reasons for leaving are personal reasons. As you all know, my family's in Alabama and getting closer back to them. So, but I've enjoyed it, and I can't thank our staff enough. We've got a great staff who puts these things together. Most folks don't realize what goes into even a small meeting, the amount of work that goes into reviewing the applications, getting them together, getting them to you all to review. But it takes a lot of effort, and the staff is extremely professional and very conscientious about what they do. And I just want to thank them. They don't get enough thanks, Mr. Chairman, because they do a tremendous job, take their jobs very seriously, and try to serve the citizens of Walton County as best they possibly can. So I'm leaving here. I'm sad to leave, but I feel very, very comfortable with the staff that's here they'll continue to do a good job and serve you guys well.
Well, Wayne, I appreciate it, and I certainly
Thank you.
appreciate your trying to deflect the praise to your staff, because you put together a heck of a staff. But
Very proud of them.
But generally speaking, a staff in an office reflects its leadership, and I think you've been
I
an
appreciate that.
outstanding leader.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
We're adjourned.